There are moments life creates so unexpectedly that you don't even have time to prepare your heart for what they reveal. And your soulmate may have just experienced one of those moments when they unexpectedly saw you again. They weren't searching for you. They weren't necessarily thinking about having a conversation with you. It may have been an ordinary day, an ordinary place, an ordinary moment, until suddenly there you were. And what caught them off guard wasn't simply your presence. It was the version of you standing in front of them. Because the person they remembered may have disappeared in ways they never noticed. They expected familiarity, but instead they encountered change. They expected the old energy, but something about you felt different. Maybe it was the way you carried yourself. Maybe it was the calmness in your expression, the confidence in your movements, the way you spoke to someone beside you, or simply the fact that you looked completely comfortable inside a life they knew nothing about. For a few seconds, they may have just watched without knowing what to do. Imagine opening an old photograph, expecting to see the same story you remember, only to discover that the final pages of that story were written without you. That's what this moment may have felt like for them. They suddenly realized that while they were holding on to an older picture of you, you had been living, changing, learning, and creating experiences they never witnessed. And perhaps the strangest part was seeing how natural it looked on you. You weren't performing. You weren't trying to prove that you had moved forward. You were simply living your life. That can hit someone much harder than any announcement ever could. They may have wondered, when did they become this person? What have they been doing all this time? How much of their life have I completely missed? And underneath those questions could be something even more personal. Do they even think about me anymore? Because seeing you unexpectedly removes the distance that memories create. They no longer have to imagine what you might look like, how you might be doing, or whether you've changed. For one brief encounter, they received an answer. And that answer may have been far more emotional than they expected. They saw someone who had continued forward. Someone whose life didn't stop at the ending they remembered. Someone who may now carry a completely different energy. And even if they tried to hide their reaction, something inside them may have shifted instantly. They came across you by chance, but they may have walked away carrying a question they never expected to ask again. Who did they become while I wasn't there? What happened next is where the encounter may have become far more emotional than your soulmate expected, because after the initial shock of seeing you, they started noticing the details. And sometimes it isn't one dramatic thing that affects someone. It's the small things they observe when they realize they are looking at a person they once knew, but no longer completely understand. Maybe they notice the way you carried yourself. You weren't trying to get attention. You weren't looking around to see who was watching. You seemed comfortable in your own world, and that quiet confidence may have caught them off guard. They may have noticed that your energy felt calmer than before, that you didn't seem weighed down by the past, or that there was something more grounded about the way you spoke and moved. And suddenly, the person they had been remembering in their mind didn't match the person standing in front of them. That difference can be surprisingly powerful. Imagine walking into a room you remember perfectly and discovering that someone has completely renovated it. The walls are familiar, the location is familiar, but the atmosphere is completely different. You know you've been there before, yet you realize you don't know the room anymore. Your soulmate may have experienced something similar when they saw you. They recognized your face, your voice, your expressions, maybe even certain little habits, but the overall feeling was different. And that may have created a strange mixture of familiarity and distance inside them. They may have thought, that's definitely them. But something has changed. And the more they watched, the more obvious it became that the change wasn't superficial. You may have become more selective with your attention. You may no longer react to everything around you. You may have stopped seeking approval from people who once mattered too much. Perhaps you seem more comfortable making decisions for yourself. Maybe your life now contains goals, friendships, routines, interests, or ambitions that your soulmate knows nothing about. And that realization can make someone curious in a way they didn't expect. They may start wondering about the chapters they missed. What happened to you after the connection ended? What experiences shaped you? Who helped you grow? What did you learn? What changed your perspective? And perhaps the most personal question of all begins quietly forming in their mind. Did they become this person because of everything we went through? Or would they have become this person anyway? That question can bring back memories they thought were finished. Because when someone from your past appears unexpectedly, the mind doesn't simply process the present moment. It starts connecting the present with everything that came before it. They may suddenly remember how you looked when you were uncertain, how you used to talk about your dreams, what you worried about, what made you excited, what made you emotional, and all the little things they once knew about you. But now those memories are being compared with the person they are seeing today, and that comparison can be emotional. They may realize that the person they once knew had potential they didn't fully recognize. They may remember moments when you were trying to find yourself, moments when you needed reassurance, moments when you were still figuring out where your life was going. And now, standing there unexpectedly, you may look like someone who finally found their direction. That can create admiration, but it can also create a quiet sense of regret. Not necessarily because they consciously regret everything that happened, but because they suddenly understand that they were absent for a transformation they might once have wanted to witness. Imagine watching a seed you once held in your hand years ago and suddenly discovering that it has grown into a tree. You remember the seed, but you never saw the seasons that shaped it. You weren't there for the rain, the storms, the sunlight, or the slow process beneath the surface. And now you are standing in front of something far bigger than what you remembered. That may be what your soulmate felt. They knew one version of you. Life created another, and the encounter forced those two versions to exist in the same moment. This is also why they may have struggled to look away. They could have simply acknowledged you and continued with their day, but something may have kept pulling their attention back. They may have wanted to understand whether you noticed them. They may have wondered if you recognized them immediately. They may have been studying your expression, trying to determine whether seeing them affected you too. Because suddenly, the encounter wasn't only about what they were feeling. They wanted to know what you were feeling. Did your face change? Did you hesitate? Did you look surprised? Did you seem completely unaffected? That uncertainty can stay with someone. If you appeared calm, they may have wondered whether you had truly moved on. If you smiled, they may have replayed that smile later. If you seemed distant, they may have wondered whether the distance between you had become permanent. And if you looked happy without them, that may have been the hardest thing to process. Not because your happiness is something they don't want for you, but because it proves something they may have struggled to accept. Your life continued. You didn't remain frozen inside the memory they carried. You kept becoming someone new, and perhaps they are beginning to understand that they only knew one chapter of your story. They may have thought they understood you because they knew the person you were around them. But people are not one fixed version. They evolve through experiences, challenges, losses, victories, and quiet realizations that other people never see. Your soulmate may now be wondering how many parts of you developed after they were gone. How many dreams changed? How many fears disappeared? How many boundaries were created? How much stronger did you become? And that curiosity can be difficult to satisfy because they can't simply rewind time and watch everything unfold. They can only look at the evidence standing in front of them. You, the new energy, the new confidence, the life they didn't know about. And perhaps that is what made the encounter so powerful. They didn't just unexpectedly see someone from their past. They unexpectedly discovered that the person they remembered had continued becoming someone they never got the chance to meet. And once that realization settles in, the mind naturally begins asking another question. If this is who you became without them, what else about you have they completely missed? That question may be the one that follows them long after the encounter is over. But then came the part they probably tried hardest to hide. Seeing you was one thing, realizing that their own reaction was stronger than expected, was something completely different. They may have told themselves they would be calm if they ever saw you again. Maybe they imagined this moment before, wondering how they would behave, what they would say, whether they would feel anything at all. Perhaps they even believed enough time had passed for the emotions to become ordinary memories. But the human heart doesn't always follow the schedule the mind creates. Sometimes one unexpected glance can bring an entire emotional chapter rushing back before you have time to stop it. And that may be exactly what happened to your soulmate. They saw you, and for a brief moment the years between you seemed to disappear. Maybe their expression changed before they could control it. Maybe they looked twice. Maybe they became unusually quiet. Maybe they suddenly didn't know where to put their attention. They could have tried to act completely normal, but something about their reaction may have revealed that the encounter meant more than they wanted it to. Imagine hearing a song you haven't heard since a particular chapter of your life. You aren't prepared for it. One second you're going about your day, and the next, an entire collection of memories arrives at once. Not because the song itself is powerful, but because your mind connected it to someone, somewhere, something you once felt. Your presence may have worked in exactly the same way for them. You weren't simply a person standing in front of them. You were connected to a period of their life, to emotions, conversations, dreams, disappointments, laughter, uncertainty, and moments they thought they had already placed somewhere safely in the past. Then suddenly all of it became present again, and perhaps that is why they couldn't immediately look away. They may have been trying to understand their own reaction, while simultaneously trying to make sure you didn't notice it. They may have wondered, why am I feeling this? Why does seeing them still affect me? Why does this feel different from simply remembering them? Those questions can create an internal conflict because the mind may have one explanation while the heart produces another. The mind might say, it's just surprise. Then another memory appears. It's just nostalgia. Then they remember something specific about you they hadn't thought about in years. It's nothing. Then they realize their mood has completely changed. And suddenly, the simple explanation doesn't feel convincing anymore. That doesn't necessarily mean they immediately decided they wanted to return. It means the encounter revealed that the emotional significance of your connection may not have disappeared as completely as they once believed. And perhaps the most revealing part was not what they did in that moment, but what happened afterward. Because once the encounter ended, they could no longer use the distraction of the situation to avoid what they felt. They were alone with the memory of seeing you. They could replay the scene. They could remember your expression. They could wonder whether you looked happy. They could think about how different you seemed. They could remember the exact moment their eyes met yours. And sometimes those tiny details become the ones that stay. Imagine throwing a stone into still water. The stone disappears almost immediately, but the ripples continue traveling long after you can no longer see the stone itself. That's what this encounter may have become for them. The meeting was brief, but the emotional ripples continued. They may have found themselves thinking about you later that evening, then again the next morning. Then perhaps remembering something completely unrelated and suddenly connecting it back to you. That's how unexpected encounters can work. They don't always create new feelings. Sometimes they uncover feelings that were already there beneath the surface. Your soulmate may have thought they had moved beyond the emotional intensity of your connection, but seeing you in your new life may have shown them that they had simply learned how to live without actively touching those emotions. There is a difference between something being gone and something being quiet, and now they may be realizing that difference. They may also have noticed something about themselves that surprised them. They cared about how you saw them. Even if they didn't speak, they may have wondered whether you noticed their reaction, whether you thought they looked different, whether you were impressed, indifferent, uncomfortable, or completely unaffected. Why would they care? Because somewhere inside, your opinion may still carry emotional weight, and that can be difficult to admit. They may have wanted to appear composed while secretly hoping you would notice them too. They may have wondered whether you had changed so much that they were now only a stranger, from your past. That possibility can sting, because one of the hardest things about losing a meaningful connection is realizing that someone who once knew so much about you may eventually know nothing about the life you are living now. They may have once known your moods, your dreams, your fears, your favorite conversations, the things that made you laugh, and the things that made you withdraw. No, they may be standing outside your life, trying to understand you from a distance. And seeing you unexpectedly makes that distance visible. Maybe they noticed that other people seemed comfortable around you. Maybe they saw you laughing naturally. Maybe they saw you confidently handling something that would once have overwhelmed you. Perhaps they realized you looked genuinely at peace. And that can create a complicated emotion, because they may be happy that you're doing well, while simultaneously wondering whether there is still any emotional connection between you. They may ask themselves, did I miss my chance? Did they become happier after I left? Would they even want to hear from me now? These questions don't always produce immediate answers. Sometimes they simply sit inside a person and grow. And this is where the encounter becomes more than coincidence in their mind. They may start attaching meaning to it. They may wonder why they saw you at that exact moment, in that exact place, after so much time. They may tell themselves it was random, but emotionally, the timing may feel strangely significant. Not necessarily because the universe has guaranteed a reunion, but because the encounter forced them to confront something they had been able to avoid while you remained out of sight. They had created a mental version of you that was easier to understand. Seeing the real you disrupted that version. Now they know you are not frozen in the past. You are alive, changing, growing, and creating experiences they know nothing about. And perhaps that is what made their reaction impossible to completely hide. They weren't simply surprised to see you. They were surprised by what seeing you awakened inside themselves. A memory became a feeling became a question. And that question may now be following them. If one unexpected glimpse of you could bring so much back, what would happen if they actually had a real conversation with you again? They may not know the answer yet, but they are thinking about it. And that is where this story becomes even more emotionally complicated, because after the surprise wears off, they may begin comparing the life they are living now with the life they just witnessed you living. And that comparison could reveal something they weren't ready to see. And this is where the encounter may have followed your soulmate long after the moment itself was over. Once the surprise settled, they were left alone with something they couldn't easily dismiss. The image of you living a life they knew nothing about. They may have gone back to their normal routine, answered messages, continued working, talked to people, laughed at something, and tried to act as though nothing unusual had happened. But somewhere underneath all of that, their mind may have kept returning to the same scene. You, the way you looked, the way you carried yourself, the energy around you. The small details they noticed without even realizing they were paying attention. And eventually, the encounter may have turned into comparison. Not necessarily a bitter comparison, not necessarily jealousy, but a quiet internal question about where they are now and where you seem to be. Because seeing someone from your past moving forward can sometimes become a mirror. It doesn't only show you what they've become, it makes you look at what you have become too. Imagine walking past a window at night and suddenly seeing your own reflection more clearly than the street behind it. You thought you were looking outward, but for a moment you were forced to look inward. Your soulmate may have experienced something similar. They were looking at your new life, but underneath that observation, they were confronting their own choices, their own memories, and perhaps the paths they never explored with you. They may have started wondering what your life looks like when they aren't around. Who are the people you spend time with now? What makes you happy? What goals are you pursuing? What kind of person has access to the version of you they never got to know? And perhaps one question became harder to ignore than the rest. Where would I fit into this life now? That question can be powerful because it doesn't assume that you are waiting. In fact, it acknowledges the opposite. You have continued moving. You have built something. You have developed routines, boundaries, dreams, and a sense of identity that may not depend on the connection you once shared. And your soulmate may suddenly understand that they can't simply walk back into your life and expect everything to feel exactly as it did before. The world has changed. You have changed. They have changed. The old dynamic may no longer exist, and that realization can create both curiosity and uncertainty. They may wonder whether you would even recognize the person they have become. They may wonder whether you would care about their life now. They may wonder whether there is still an emotional doorway between you, or whether that doorway quietly closed while they were looking somewhere else. Perhaps they begin remembering the things they once assumed would always remain available. The conversations they postponed, the questions they never asked. The moments when they could have shown more vulnerability, but chose silence instead. The opportunities they assumed would come around again. Seeing you now may have made those memories feel different. Before, they could tell themselves there was always more time. Now they have evidence that time actually moved. You didn't remain where they left you, and that can awaken a subtle form of regret. Not necessarily regret over the entire relationship, but regret over what was left unexplored. They may think, what if I had understood them better? Or what if I had stayed a little longer? What if I had been more honest? Would our story look different now? These questions can be uncomfortable because there is no easy way to test the answers. The past cannot be reopened exactly as it was, and that may be why the encounter stays in their mind. It creates an unfinished conversation without anyone saying a word. They may also start wondering whether your new confidence came from healing the connection or from finally releasing it. That distinction matters. If you seem peaceful, they may wonder whether you found peace because you stopped waiting for anything from them. If you seem happy, they may wonder whether their absence eventually became irrelevant. If you seem stronger, they may wonder what experiences transformed you. And if you seemed genuinely unaffected by seeing them, that could create the deepest question of all. Have I become a memory to them while they are still a living question to me? That realization can be humbling, because sometimes we assume that if a connection mattered to us, it must still occupy the same space in the other person's heart. But life doesn't always work that way. People process differently. People heal differently. People carry memories differently. Your soulmate may now be realizing that while they were preserving an older version of the story, you were writing new chapters. Imagine holding a map of a city that was accurate years ago, then returning and discovering that entire roads have changed. You can still recognize the landmarks, but the route you once knew no longer works. That may be how they feel about approaching you now. They remember the way to the old version of you, but they don't know how to reach the person standing in front of them today. And that uncertainty may be exactly what makes them hesitate. They might want to know more, but they don't know whether asking is appropriate. They might want to reconnect, but they don't know whether you would welcome it. They might want to tell you what seeing you did to them, but admitting that would require vulnerability. So instead they may keep the questions private. They may replay the encounter. They may quietly wonder about your future. They may even imagine what it would be like to sit across from you and have the conversation they never had. But there is something else they may have realized, and it is perhaps the most important part of this entire encounter. They are no longer looking at you only through the lens of the past. They are beginning to see you as someone with a present and a future of your own. That changes everything. You are not simply the person they once loved, cared about, missed, or wondered about. You are someone who has continued becoming. And if they want any place in your future, they may have to understand the person you are now, instead of trying to reconnect with the person you used to be. That thought can be both exciting and frightening, because suddenly the question is no longer whether you still remember them. The question is whether they still have something meaningful to offer the life you built without them. And perhaps, after that unexpected meeting, they finally understand that if they ever want an answer, they can't find it by replaying the past. They would have to face the present. They would have to approach the new version of you, and that may be exactly what they are quietly thinking about now. And now comes the part your soulmate may not have expected at all. The encounter is over, the moment has passed, and yet something about it may still be following them. They can continue with their day, return to familiar routines, speak to other people, and convince themselves that it was simply a coincidence. But deep down, they may know that something changed the moment they saw you. Not necessarily because you said anything extraordinary, but because your presence gave them an answer to a question they had never fully asked themselves. You were still moving forward. You were still becoming. You had built a life beyond the version of the story they remembered. And now they have to sit with that reality. Perhaps they expected to see someone who still carried the same emotional weight, someone who looked like they were waiting for the past to make sense. Instead, they saw someone who appeared to have found their own direction. That realization can be strangely powerful because it changes the question from, "Do they still remember me?" to something much deeper. Do I still belong anywhere in their world? That is a completely different question, and it may be the one they cannot stop thinking about. Imagine standing outside a house you once knew by heart and suddenly realizing the lights are on, but the rooms have been rearranged, the furniture is different, and someone else has been living there long enough to make it feel like home. You still recognize the house, but you cannot assume you have a key anymore. That may be how your soulmate feels about your life now. They remember the connection. They remember the version of you they once knew, but they are beginning to understand that memories do not automatically create access to someone's present. And that realization may bring a mixture of emotions they weren't prepared to experience. There could be nostalgia for what once existed, admiration for how far you've come, curiosity about what your life looks like now, and perhaps even a quiet regret over the moments they didn't appreciate enough while they had them. But underneath all of that may be something more vulnerable, uncertainty. They may wonder whether you would even want them around anymore. They may wonder if the person they once knew still exists somewhere inside you, or whether that chapter has been completely transformed. They may wonder if you would recognize their growth too, because while they were observing you, they may have realized something else. This isn't only your story. They have changed too. Time has shaped them just as it shaped you. And suddenly, the idea of reconnecting, even in a simple conversation, becomes much more complicated than they imagined. They can't simply walk back into an old dynamic because neither of you is exactly who you were. If anything happens from here, it would have to begin from the present. And perhaps that is what makes this encounter so emotionally significant. It didn't promise a reunion. It didn't guarantee a message. It didn't magically rewrite the past. What it did was create awareness. Your soulmate now knows something they didn't know before. They know you have a life beyond the story they remembered. They know you've experienced things without them. They know you've grown in ways they weren't there to witness. And most importantly, they know that the connection between you may still carry emotional weight, because if it didn't, seeing you would not have affected them so deeply. But they may also understand that feelings alone aren't enough. If they are wondering where they fit into your future, they have to confront a difficult truth. They cannot expect the future to make room for them simply because they once occupied a meaningful place in your past. Your future is being built around the person you have become. That means anyone who enters it must meet you there, not pull you backward. Perhaps this is why the image of that chance meeting keeps returning to them. They aren't only remembering your face. They are remembering the feeling of realizing that you had become someone they didn't know. They may replay the smallest details because those details carry information. The way you smiled, the way you spoke, the confidence in your voice, the calmness in your expression, the people around you, the life surrounding you. Every little observation becomes another piece of evidence that your story continued, and maybe somewhere in that realization they feel proud of you. Maybe they silently admire the fact that you kept going. Maybe they wish they had known how difficult the journey was for you. Maybe they wonder what you would tell them if they ever asked. And perhaps they are beginning to understand that sometimes missing someone isn't about wanting the past back. Sometimes it is about realizing how deeply someone mattered and wondering whether there is still a meaningful way to know them again. That distinction is important because the future isn't necessarily asking you to return to anything. It may simply be showing that the chapter you thought was finished still contains emotions neither of you completely understood. But now you are in a different place. You have learned things. You have experienced life outside that connection. You have discovered parts of yourself that may never have emerged otherwise. And your soulmate may now be standing at the edge of that realization, wondering whether there is any space left for them, not the space they once occupied, but a new space that would have to be earned through honesty, maturity, and genuine understanding. So if you have been wondering why that unexpected meeting felt strangely intense, why their reaction seemed different from what you expected, or why the moment appeared to linger even after both of you walked away, perhaps it is because neither of you simply saw a familiar face that day. You saw evidence of time. You saw what life had done to two people who once shared something meaningful. And your soulmate may have walked away realizing that you are no longer someone they can understand by looking backward. If they want to know you now, they would have to look forward. And that may be the thought that stays with them the longest. Because the real question isn't whether they still have feelings. The real question is whether they are brave enough to acknowledge what those feelings mean now. Maybe they will reach out. Maybe they will remain silent for a while. Maybe they will need time to understand what happened inside them. But one thing may already be different. They can no longer pretend they don't wonder about you. They saw you living a life they didn't expect to see, and somewhere inside that unexpected moment, they caught a glimpse of a future that no longer revolves around the past. And now they may be asking themselves one final question. If I still want a place in their story, am I willing to become someone who belongs in the chapter they are writing now? Because your life is moving forward. Your heart is learning. Your world is expanding. And whoever is meant to walk beside you next will have to meet you where you are, not where you used to be. Perhaps that chance meeting wasn't the beginning of something new, and perhaps it wasn't the end either. Perhaps it was simply a mirror placed in front of both of you at exactly the right moment, showing what changed, what remained, and what might still be possible if two people ever choose to meet again, not as the people they once were, but as the people they have finally become.